Have you ever felt underestimated, as if no one truly saw your worth? This question serves as the starting point for a story that proves God does not choose the way humans do. In Bethlehem, a small village surrounded by hills, the prophet Samuel walks with determination. He carries a mission that will forever change the history of Israel. God has sent him to Jesse, for among his sons is the next king. The people of Bethlehem are uneasy. The presence of a prophet usually signals a warning. Is God angry with us? They whisper to one another. Samuel, noticing their concern, reassures the townspeople. I have come to offer a sacrifice to the Lord. Prepare yourselves and come with me. Jesse and his sons are invited, and when the family gathers, the anticipation is palpable. Eliab, the eldest son, a tall and strong man, steps forward first. He looks like a king, everyone thinks. Even Samuel considers this possibility. But God whispers to the prophet's heart, "Do not be impressed by his appearance or height, for I have rejected him. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." This moment is profound. How often do we judge by appearances? How often do we fail to see the potential in ourselves or in others? One by one, Jesse's sons pass before Samuel, Abinadab, Shammah, and 4 other brothers. With each presentation, Samuel hears the same response. It's not this one. Jesse, perplexed, watches. He had brought all the sons he deemed important. Samuel, however, persists. Are these all your sons? With a tone almost dismissive, Jesse replies, There is still the youngest, but he's tending the sheep. Imagine this. David wasn't even considered worthy of being present. How many times in our lives are we overlooked or left out because others fail to see our value? It's in this exclusion that the beauty of God's choice lies. Samuel wastes no time. Send for him. We will not sit down to eat until he arrives. As everyone waits, David is summoned. He is in the fields, surrounded by sheep, the scent of wool clinging to his clothes. He is young, likely around 15 years old. His reddish hair catches the sunlight, and his eyes shine with an almost childlike curiosity. When David enters, the reaction is immediate. He does not have the majestic stature expected of a king, but his presence is undeniable. God speaks clearly to Samuel. He is the one. Anoint him, for he is my chosen. In that moment, David kneels and Samuel pours the oil over his head. The Spirit of the Lord comes powerfully upon him, and the transformation begins. What is striking here is not just the calling, but the contrast. God chooses the invisible, the forgotten, the underestimated to accomplish great things. David returns to the fields, but now with a weight on his shoulders. He knows he has been chosen for something greater, but he doesn't fully understand what that means. He doesn't become king immediately. In fact, his life seems to stay the same. This is something many of us can relate to. How often do we feel destined for something greater, yet face a long period of waiting? David, however, doesn't complain. He continues doing what he knows, tending the sheep. He practices patience, faith, and service, qualities that will later define him as a leader. For the audience, this part delivers a powerful message. No matter where you are right now or how others see you, God has already prepared you for something greater. Why did God choose David? Because he saw beyond appearances. He saw a heart full of faith, courage, and humility. This choice reminds us that regardless of our circumstances or others' opinions, we are valuable in God's eyes. David represents all those who have been overlooked, underestimated, or left behind. He is proof that God has a unique plan for each of us, and that this plan doesn't rely on the qualifications the world values. Now I ask you, what are the talents and qualities you have that no one may recognize? What would you do if you knew God has already chosen you for something extraordinary? This story teaches us that even when we are last in line, God sees us. He chooses us because what truly matters is the heart. And like David, we all have the potential to be used by him in extraordinary ways. Have you ever faced something that seemed too big for you? Something that made you think, I can't handle this on my own? The army of Israel is camped in the valley of Elah, waiting for a decisive battle against the Philistines. The atmosphere is tense. Men pace back and forth, worried, their spears clanging against their shields in a repetitive, almost hypnotic rhythm. But what truly paralyzes the Israelites is the man who towers on the other side of the valley, Goliath. He's not just a soldier, he's a giant standing over 9 feet tall. His armor gleams in the sunlight, and his voice thunders, "Choose a man to fight me. If he defeats me, we will be your servants. But if I defeat him, you will be our slaves." Day after day, Goliath repeats this challenge, and fear grows in the hearts of the Israelites. No warrior dares to face him, and it's here that we begin to understand the difference between human courage and divine courage. What about you? Have you ever felt the weight of a challenge that seemed impossible? David, the young shepherd boy, is not yet part of the army. He's at home tending his family's flock when Jesse, his father, calls him, "Take this food to your brothers at the camp and see how they're doing." Obedient as always, David gathers the bread and cheese and sets off for the valley of Elah. When he arrives at the camp, he immediately senses the atmosphere of despair. Soldiers whisper among themselves, avoiding even a glance at the battlefield. Suddenly, Goliath's voice echoes once again, mocking and defying the God of Israel. David is outraged. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine to challenge the armies of the living God? He approaches the soldiers asking, "What will be done for the man who defeats this giant?" Some ignore him while others mock his boldness, but David is undeterred. He knows God's name is at stake, and that is something he cannot stand for. David's brothers don't take kindly to his courage. Eliab, the eldest, rebukes him. "Why have you come here? Who's watching those few sheep you're supposed to be taking care of? I know you're arrogant and just came to watch the battle." But David doesn't let the criticism shake him. He brushes off their remarks and insists he can face Goliath. His confidence doesn't come from military skills or physical strength, but from his faith in God. He tells King Saul, "Don't let anyone lose heart because of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Saul, astonished by the young man's determination, tries to dissuade him. "You can't fight him. You're just a boy, and he's been a warrior since his youth." But David responds with conviction. "When I was tending my father's sheep, I fought lions and bears. God delivered me from them all, and he will deliver me from this Philistine too." This scene is a powerful lesson about how our confidence should be placed in God, not in our strength or abilities. Saul tries to equip David with his own armor, but it's far too big and heavy. David can barely move in it. He takes it off and chooses what he knows, his sling and 5 smooth stones from the stream. This detail is symbolic. David doesn't try to mimic others or use methods that aren't his own. He trusts in what he knows, and more importantly, he trusts in God. As he walks toward the battlefield, the Israelite soldiers watch in disbelief. Some murmur, "He's crazy. A boy with a sling against a giant." But David doesn't hear the doubts. His eyes are fixed on Goliath, and his heart is anchored in God's promise. On the battlefield, Goliath laughs as he sees David approaching. His voice booms, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? Come here, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." David, small in stature compared to the giant, replies with unshakable faith, "You come against me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Today, the Lord will deliver you into my hands." David places a stone in his sling, skillfully whirls it and releases it. The stone strikes Goliath on the forehead, and the giant crashes to the ground. Silence falls over the valley. For a moment, no one moves. Then, cheers of victory erupt from the Israelite side. David runs to Goliath's body, takes his sword and cuts off his head. It's a complete victory. But more than that, it's a demonstration that faith in God can overcome any giant. Have you ever felt like your success bothered other people? After defeating Goliath, David quickly becomes a national hero in Israel. People revere him, and women sing in celebration. Saul has slain thousands, but David tens of thousands. These words, while intended to exalt David's deeds, plant a seed of jealousy in King Saul's heart. At first, Saul admires David. He welcomes him into his court and appoints him as a leader of the army. David, with his skill and courage, achieves many victories. But as the people celebrate, Saul begins to feel a shadow looming over him. The prophecy of Samuel that his kingdom would be taken away feels more real with each passing day. He realizes that David, loved by all, might be God's chosen one. Saul's jealousy soon transforms into fear and hatred. David's presence becomes unbearable to him. During a moment of torment, as David plays the harp to soothe him, Saul grabs his spear and hurls it at the young man. David narrowly escapes. The atmosphere in the court changes. David, always loyal and humble, cannot understand why Saul seeks his life. He asks himself, "Why is someone I served so faithfully now treating me as an enemy?" This moment resonates with us. How often are we hurt by those we've served or helped? How often does success attract not just admiration, but also envy? Realizing Saul will not rest until he is dead, David flees. He leaves behind the court, his privileged position, and his comfortable life to become a fugitive. Now, he is a hunted man, pursued by the very king who once trusted him. David hides in caves, deserts, and even enemy cities. He endures sleepless nights and survives on whatever food he can find. Despite this, his faith remains unshaken. He writes psalms in which he cries out to God for protection and strength, like Psalm 57, where he declares, "Have mercy on me, O God, have mercy on me, for in you my soul takes refuge." These moments of solitude and danger shape David's character, preparing him for the challenges ahead. Even while on the run, David has opportunities to kill Saul, but he refuses. In one instance, while David and his men are hiding in a cave, Saul enters alone to rest. David's men whisper, "This is your chance. God has delivered your enemy into your hands." David, however, approaches quietly and cuts off only a piece of Saul's robe. When Saul leaves the cave, David calls out from a distance, "My lord, the king, look, today the Lord delivered you into my hands, but I did not kill you. I will never raise my hand against the Lord's anointed." Saul, moved by this act of mercy, weeps and says, "You are more righteous than I. You have treated me well while I have tried to take your life." This scene is a powerful testimony to self-control and faith. David understands that vengeance is not his to take, but belongs to God. And what about us? Do we have the patience to wait for God's timing, even when we are wronged? Despite all the challenges, David remains faithful to God. He does not seek shortcuts to the throne. He knows that God's way, though longer and harder, is always the best. While in exile, David could have chosen to rebel, doubt, or even give up, but he perseveres. His relationship with Saul, marked by hatred on one side, also becomes a testament to David's commitment to divine values. This part of David's story reminds us that being faithful to God is not always easy. We may face persecution, injustice, and pain, but like David, we are called to stand firm. After all, God is in control, and His justice will prevail in His perfect time. Have you ever felt isolated, unsure of where to turn, as if the world were against you? David, now a fugitive, finds refuge in the cave of Adullam. The place is dark, damp, and desolate. He is exhausted, his heart heavy with Saul's betrayal. Yet, even in his solitude, David is not alone for long. Men begin to gather around him, but they are not mighty warriors or people of influence. They are outcasts, those in debt, distressed, and discontented with Saul's kingdom. David, the shepherd who once cared for sheep, now becomes the leader of an unlikely band. He transforms these downtrodden men into a loyal army. This is a powerful lesson. True leadership is not about titles, but character. Meanwhile, David composes psalms such as Psalm 34, where he declares, "Glorify the Lord with me. Let us exalt His name together." Even in times of despair, he continues to seek God, trusting that the Lord is shaping his destiny. Fleeing from Saul, David seeks help from the priest Ahimelech in Nob. He asks for food and weapons, and the priest, unaware of the tension between David and Saul, provides him with consecrated bread and Goliath's sword. But Doeg the Edomite, a loyal servant of Saul, witnesses this encounter and reports it to the king. Enraged, Saul orders the death of Ahimelech and all the priests of Nob. This massacre marks one of the darkest moments of Saul's reign, revealing how far he is willing to go out of fear of losing his throne. For David, the news is devastating. He blames himself for the priests' deaths and declares, "I am responsible for the death of your whole family." This scene reminds us how our actions, even those with good intentions, can have unforeseen consequences. In a surprising turn of events, David seeks refuge among the Philistines, Israel's sworn enemies. He goes to Gath and presents himself to King Achish. However, the king's servants recognize David and begin to whisper, "Isn't this David, about whom they sang, 'Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands'?" Realizing the danger, David pretends to be insane. He lets saliva run down his beard, scratches at doors, and behaves irrationally. Achish, convinced that David has lost his mind, expels him, sparing his life. This episode is striking. David, the future king, must resort to humiliating actions to survive. It teaches us that there are moments when we must make hard decisions to protect the mission God has given us. While living among the Philistines, David continues leading his group of men. They carry out raids against Israel's enemies, doing so cautiously to avoid suspicion. One day, while they are away, the Amalekites attack Ziklag, the town where David and his men live, taking the women and children captive. When David and his men return to find the devastation, despair overtakes them. The men weep until they have no strength left, and some even talk of stoning David. But David finds strength in the Lord. He seeks God's guidance. "Shall I pursue this raiding party? Will I overtake them?" And God answers, "Pursue them. You will certainly overtake them and succeed in the rescue." David leads his men in a decisive attack. They recover everything, their wives, children, and possessions. This event strengthens his men's trust in his leadership and in God's favor upon him. The years as a fugitive shape David as a leader. He learns to trust God, even in the most challenging circumstances. He leads with courage, compassion, and wisdom, earning the loyalty of his men not through force or fear, but by example. Despite Saul's relentless pursuit, David never loses sight of his mission. He understands that being a king is not just about sitting on a throne, but about serving God and the people with humility. Have you ever felt that the moment you've been waiting for your entire life has finally arrived, but in a way you never imagined? The war against the Philistines reaches its peak. Saul and his sons are on the battlefield at Mount Gilboa, fighting bravely, but the Philistines are relentless. During the battle, Saul's sons, including Jonathan, David's closest friend, are killed. Gravely wounded by enemy archers, Saul takes his own sword and falls on it to avoid capture. News of Saul and his sons' deaths reaches David in Ziklag. He tears his clothes, weeps, and mourns deeply. David doesn't see Saul's death as an opportunity for celebration, but as a national tragedy. He composes a lament in honor of Saul and Jonathan. "O mountains of Gilboa, may no dew or rain fall on you again. Jonathan and Saul, beloved and gracious, in life and in death they were not parted." This moment reveals David's greatness. Despite being relentlessly pursued by Saul, David shows respect for the king and grieves the loss of his friend. After Saul's death, the leaders of the tribe of Judah come to David in Hebron and anoint him as king. It is the first step in fulfilling the promise God made to him years before, when he was still a young shepherd. But the path to the throne of all Israel is not simple. Ishbosheth, Saul's son, is proclaimed king by the other tribes with the support of Abner, Saul's army commander. The kingdom is divided, and a prolonged conflict ensues between the house of Saul and the house of David. Even so, David continues to trust in God's timing. He does not force his ascension, but acts wisely, gaining allies and strengthening his position as a leader. After years of civil war, Abner, Ishbosheth's commander, grows weary of the division and seeks an alliance with David. He acknowledges that God has chosen David to be king over all Israel. Shortly after, Ishbosheth is assassinated by two of his own men, and the northern tribes finally come to David, asking him to rule over them. David is anointed king of all Israel in Hebron. He governs with justice and wisdom, consolidating the kingdom and unifying the tribes. He chooses Jerusalem as his capital, a neutral city between the northern and southern tribes, and transforms it into the political and spiritual center of the kingdom. Imagine this moment. The shepherd boy who once faced a giant now sits on the throne, fulfilling the destiny God had laid out for him. David's reign is marked by military conquests, administrative reforms, and a passionate devotion to God. He establishes the Ark of the Covenant in Jerusalem, making the city the spiritual heart of Israel. But David's legacy is not only political or military, it is spiritual. God makes a covenant with him, promising that his lineage will reign forever. This promise is fulfilled in Jesus Christ, a descendant of David, who establishes an eternal kingdom. David also serves as an example that, despite our flaws, we can be used by God. He committed serious mistakes, such as his affair with Bathsheba, but his sincere repentance showed that God values a contrite heart. David is remembered as a man after God's own heart. His story teaches us that no matter how small our beginnings or how great our mistakes, God can use us to fulfill his purposes. Now I invite you to reflect. What can we learn from David's life? Are we trusting in God's timing, even when we face difficulties and uncertainties? If this message resonated with you, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Here we always share inspiring Bible stories that show how God can transform lives. Like this video, share it with your friends, and leave a comment. Which part of David's story touched you the most? And don't forget to check out our other videos where we explore biblical characters and lessons that have so much to teach us. May God bless you and your family. See you in the next video. In